Why, hello there, sickbay. Welcome back. Settle in, relax, put your feet up. This tale is of Xemnas Deephollow. In fact, I believe he's going to tell it himself. Prepare yourselves for the beginnings of Xemnas Deephollow.
The Deephollows were amongst one of the bustling families of cousins, nanas and siblings that devised the tiefling town of Falkreath, within a day walk of Winthal in the abundant Talsar countryside. As with the majority of tieflings in Falkreath, farming ran in the Deephollow's blood for numerous generations, hastily working to grow grain and vegetable in their vast gardens, amongst their flock of swans and stout sheep, using the excess produce and finest wool to make ends meet at the monthly markets in Winthal. But Talsar, and within it Falkreath and Winthal, lay in the Boethian Peninsula, the unbound self-dependent, often selfish and ruthless communities of outsiders that the rule of Bane had left behind as the majority occupants of the peninsula left the tieflings of Falkreath less carefree than their relations in other, more civilized and fruitful corners of Ichias. Ansem would keep a sight stashed away in a cabinet in his main bedroom. His eldest daughter had slain a bugbear, stalking their sheep with it, and Ansem chased off more than one group of burglars with it. It had become a family heirloom of luck and safekeeping at this point. His wife Marluxia had an affinity for tinkering and mending, fixing pots and buckets, sharpening all manner of which should be sharpened, and crafting smaller tools and such would be used as means of income when harvest would be stormed by marauders or goods pillaged on the journey to the Winthal market. Despite the hardships and destitution that came with life in Talsar, it brought joy to those who took beauty in the untamed. Endless rolling hills and windswept grasslands, all bordered by ancient thrawn, fey-touched forests. The tieflings of Falkreath may not have lived as carefree as their kinfolk in the cultivated cities beyond the expanse, but they had a gusto for life, an admiration for the splendor in their territory, and the regard for filling meal accompanied by a bawdy tune and jolly gathering of those close to the heart, rivaling any tiefling you may encounter in Ichias. Ansem and Marluxia Deephollow raised their young in awareness of frugality, dedicated to tough yet fulfilling and shared work, an expectation of loss yet mitigated by sharing, and in the comfort of sympathy and thought, a well-balanced faction. Their middle child Xemnas was a tinkerer and dreamer. From a young age he adored toying with his mother's gadgets and helping her arrange things, mostly by dismantling them. He loved to delve not only into the mysteries of the inanimate, but also all the little creatures around him, running after pixies to their forest hideouts and chasing butterflies. He had a knack for observing and approaching the weirdest of creatures with a naive curiosity that almost seemed to give a disarming kindness. He came to be tolerated and trusted by a number of fey creatures that roamed the woodlands above Falkreath. Few tieflings had as much inclination or time to pay much heed to the existence of the secretive and deluding Fae in these parts. However, if you recounted Nana Deephollow's tales, you would hear the talk of a portal, a gateway to the land of Feywild, in a grove of oaks and birch, just an after morns above the Deephollow's pasture, where the woods bordered. Semnis was much too young to understand the gently crackling rift they passed through was a portal to a different plane. He was entranced by the bright green glow enveloping him on the summer morning, following his four pixie friends, skipping between two towering trees into a twilit clearing filled by a myriad of humming, singing, and buzzing. Strange colors and monstrous trees surrounded them as the pixies guided their tiefling friend across giant vines over sparkling pools of gently glowing water to introduce him to Dares, the three-legged centaur who would recount countless tales of the bygone glory of his fighting days to those who would lend him an ear. Time seemed to dissolve within the phase plane, some minutes, or maybe hours, even days later. The tiefling, one of his pixie friends, the other two had caught their eye by some shiny pursuits and diverged from them, and two brownies were tumbling through the abundant understory, playing catch the dancing lights, when Xemnas' toes got caught in some fur, which resembled a giant decaying log on the edge of a prattling creek. The Fey friends darted away with fear as the log sat upright and looked at the little party with soulless, unwavering eyes. Yet Xemnas just gazed in awe into the bottomless black pools. After the tiefling held his gaze for a substantial time, he heard an impressed rumbling voice that he had hardly noticed was just within his head. The voice questioned, as he was still, and his bare feet well intertwined in his fur, to remain for the time being, and narrate stories from the world of the non-Fey. The voice was one of the softest he'd heard. It allured him with its kindness, and Xemnas found nothing more natural than to lay on the welcoming warm fur and recite to the fuzzy log all manner of stories. That of raising and shearing sheep, the monthly journey to Winthal's market, even the frightful memories of him hiding as his family fought off roaming pillagers, trying to make a quick meal up of their chickens. As Xemnas lay telling his stories, tiredness started to creep upon him. Upon the acknowledgement of needing sleep, a knot of fright pained his stomach. He had no clue how to return home, how long he had been away for. With a quivering voice, Xemnas muttered to the log, asking it to show him the way home. A long, low peal of laughter rang in his head, at which moment, out of nowhere, Dares the centaur returned, bowing before the log, and bearing him to bring him back to the vibrant green portal which he seemingly saw ages ago. To his riddling delight, the sun had not even passed the apex when returning from the woods. Xemnas climbed over the stone wall protecting his family's flock and ran home across the gardens. After eve, when a hard day's work was done, and Xemnas had received a pat on his woolly head from his father after tirelessly helping to shear the sheep, and a scolding from Marlaxia for losing pieces to a sundial she was fixing for a merchant in Windal, Xemnas eagerly told his family the account from the morning's adventure to the magical forest beyond their cobble walls. His mother listened to his tales with much mirth and appeasement, yet taking it for nothing more than a vivid fantasy. On the contrary, Ansem did not take the words so lightly, remembering the fables Nana Deephollow would tell portraying a gateway to the Feywild. He warned him not to venture too deeply into the forest, as not all Fey were kind creatures. A number with facades playful, kind only to lure the unexpected into their calculated ploys. One may also never know when marauders or thieves may be wandering through around Falkreath. Despite inheriting the tiefling kind's courageous heart and his father's iron will, Xemnas was only able to keep from the grove for a couple of months. Egged on by his pixie friends, he eventually gave in to his wild curiosity when work was less, allowing the young mind to wander. He eventually came to understand that twilight in the beckoning world was never ending, and time warped into completely different ways. No matter the countless hours spent playing with pixies or wild rides with Daries, when slipping back into the woods outside his property, he had never been gone more than an hour or two. Although not listening to his father, Xemnas still heeded the warning and would never venture too far within the Feywild. Over time, he memorized all the tree roots and bends in the greenery, where the fields of flowers flaunted themselves and where the dryads had their grove. He was not conscious of his luckiness, be it a fluke or not, that this corner of the Feywild, which the widely forgotten portal led to, was a sleepy and peaceful region of the Feywild in contrast to Falkreath. He never spoke a word of his adventures to his parents. While the guilt ate at him, he reassured himself it was harmless, as they just did not understand the wonder and beauty of the world around them, so he needn't worry them without a cause. Around a year's time had passed when Xemnas stumbled upon the friendly log again. It opened one deep black eye at him while he sat on his behind, intent on the brook beneath him. He sat next to a sprite who goaded him to attempt his hand at spearfishing, and who was now fixated and humiliating his first failed attempts. The sprite darted off the moment the log's eye lit upon them, and Xemnas barely with a moment to think, when the log's rumbling voice echoed in his head, greeting him with the tiefling child hath returned. Post that meeting, Xemnas made manner to wander along the small runlet in search of the sentient log whenever venturing through the Feylands, and upon locating him, amuse him for the time with his newest stories from the world of humans. Xemnas revelled in the warm, ensoothing presence, and the log was an eager listener with stories of his own, breathtaking fables of the high archfey courts. Similarly, how Xemnas was ignorant of his luck, he was also unknowing of a leering presence that had started manipulating unknowledgeable steps through guiding fireflies when pixies left him alone. When wandering so, out of the corner of his eye, he could sometimes make out a figure, that of a stag, or a satyr disappearing from the sight the moment he turned towards it. He could only wish that it may be the great archfey of the trees, which the log would go on and on about. Over time, Xemnas grew both in physique, intellect, and maturity. Alongside the recounts the log asked for grew, from that of the Deephollow's farm and trips to those of bloody battle, important people, and he could seldom fulfill the desires for tales of love, only having lustful encounters of his sister brought to the table. Xemnas was becoming more aware of the political affairs, evil and warfare in everyday life, not only due to the requests of the log, but because of the teller's experiences. The countryside of Talsar was darkening, pillaging became commonplace, travelers became more precarious, and feuds would often result in death. Against the wishes of the Deephollows, they could not shield their children from the horrors. The now 10-year-old was unable to but aid in defending their lands, witnessing the gruesome world and slowly becoming a part of it. More responsibilities were inevitable to protect the youngest brother, in particular, whilst Marluxia frequented the markets of Windle to sustain the family through her tinkering. The area surrounding the Feywild, past the Cobble Wall, was also increasing in danger, taking on a sinister mood. Malevolent, selfish, and power-hungry Fey would use the gates to outlaw traffic on their side. This however did not stop Xemnas. He would learn to utilize hidden passageways and keep hidden, helping Fey escape from bandits on one end or sinister Fey on the other. The once innocent playground of a child had become an integral part of his life. Bonds were made, responsibilities uptaken, and the hunter-gatherer lifestyle of the Fey was infecting Xemnas. Where once pixies laughed at his spearfishing, he became nearly flawless, and the knack for identifying herbs based on their attributes was ever yet increasing, despite having ways to go. Just as curiosity flooded Xemnas' veins, the same applied to his younger brother. He would wonder where he would vanish off to, and one day followed him sneakily through the crackling portal. Before him, a wonderland of red poppies and violets appeared which he joyfully and hastily gathered, till a hag laid eyes upon him. As she called upon her pack of hounds, a friendly sprite noticed what was about to unfold, and darted off to inform Xemnas about the danger his brother was in. Hearing the news, Xemnas rushed cluelessly to his brother. He hadn't the slightest clue on how to save him, yet he knew he had to try anything in his power. In the blink of an eye, an antlered man appeared out of nowhere, grabbing the tiefling child and sending him to slumber with no more than a gaze as the hag hurried off as if worried for her life. Xemnas froze in a pleasant shock as realization kicked in that the antlered creature was in fact the log he would so often visit. Before even being able to word the question, it was answered. Yes, before him stood Eliac himself, Lord Archfey, only knowing about him through the exquisite and most thrilling tales he had heard throughout the years. Eliac stated this particular area of the Feywild became a cherished resting place where he would take form of the log in order to be at peace and one with the quaint stream. Xemnas happened to be an intriguing and beloved pastime of his, not only for satisfactory reasons, but to stay informed of occurrences on the other end of the portal without having to take the journey himself. He took this information in order to protect the region of the Feywild he so much cherished, from the dangers which may make way through the portal at a given moment. The whimsical idea of studying and observing through the eyes of a young mortal also gave him vast pleasure, for reasons unbeknownst to even him. The gaze which he met with Xemnas was one of kindness. He wished to keep this odd friendship that he developed over the years. For this very same prospect, he warned about the danger of crossing to this plane of existence, and gave advice on how to increase his competence for navigating to and forth the Feywild. Never before had Xemnas felt such an honor bestowed upon him, an archfey's revelation to continue their friendship. He swore to be wearier of any of his relatives so such an incident may never reoccur, even going as far as to try concealing the gate from outsiders using the natural environment. 5 years have passed since the incident. A fire rages throughout the farmlands of Falkreath, all caused by human outlaws finding the challenge of stealing food too great. A third of the population of Thievelings of Falkreath were wiped out along with Ansem. Xemnas was devastated, distraught by what the embers around him had taken. His elder sister one of those injured greatly in the fire, yet from years of studying and collecting healing herbs, he made an attempt to save her life, yet to no avail. Even with the help of the other survivors, the injuries she sustained were too great. With the tragic loss of his father, sister, and farmland, Xemnas moved with his grieving mother and little brother to a small abode in Winthal. The only way they could survive was through his mother's tinkering business, and although he had the dedication and experience for it, he never had the natural talent, only making messes. As time egged on, stressful work for pointless pay, he only missed the forest more and more. Not long after, Xemnas moved out to live with the Deephollow's widowed uncle and cousin. They, unlike Marlaxia, didn't even bat an eye at attempting to adopt the city life, and instead banded together, stubbornly working their hardest to restore what remained of Falkreath, what remained of all they knew. Over time, Xemnas began providing for his family by refining his survival skills. They were sufficient enough to be able to provide for himself as well as his family in Winthal. As so, he regularly traveled back and forth. His knowledge of healing herbs also grew in demand. During the fire, a number of healers had either been killed off or left what remained of their homeland behind. On one of the visits, bringing back a stuffed bag of vegetables, another of apples, one full of oysters and wild game, Marluxia, ever so grateful, and told Xemnas to keep trusting his instincts, to keep those trustworthy close, whether they be mortal kind or fey alike. Surprise took over Xemnas upon these words, only to meet a smug grin on his mother's face. She had long suspected that her son encountered the portal on the other end of their home. Where else would he have learned such hunting and gathering skills? Above all giveaways was learning to speak Sylvan to a dryad. A warmth encompassed Xemnas, and a certain weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He hugged his mother and headed off, promising to remain safe. Following the catastrophic fire, life got harder for both ends of the Feywild portal. Talsar's countryside was overrun by hideous crimes, spawning from greed, raids, and pillaging became a more frequent occurrence, and sinister entities appeared on both ends. Xemnas would only find refuge and peace in the presence of his Fey friends, while he also tended to those who lost and were stricken by injury and disease. Most of all, Xemnas found solace and comfort in Eliak's presence, a warm, caring presence which he could not find anywhere else after his father's passing, one which he greatly appreciated and somehow needed. One day, unlike any other, a man came through the village, passing along with the usual string of caravan of merchants. Yet instead of traveling on the side of the road as the other merchants, he kept perusing to the far edge, observing the nearby countryside, as if something was on his mind. As the caravans traveled south, he quickly turned around back to the tiefling village and decided to rent a room for a fair price. Xemnas noticed something out of the ordinary and attempted to keep tabs on the suspicious man. He was spending a considerable amount of time wandering around Fey hereabouts. Despite Xemnas' best efforts, the man caught wind of him and decided to keep on the down low for some time, never venturing too far out. That is, until one day Xemnas had to run an errand to Winthal. It is at this point the man made his move. He captured and tortured a pixie into disclosing the location of the portal to him, where upon entering, he began collecting pixies by the masses to harvest their pixie dust from them. He attracted significant attention and was soon chased out of the Feywild. Yet he would be back with a number of magical servants to continue his cruel work. They pressed their attacks sporadically to be unpredictable and harsh as possible to their victims. What Iliac returned to was a sight of pure horror, his most beloved spot in pain, the magical core that gave it life bleeding out at an unprecedented rate. He knew instantly that the source of this destruction came not from within the Feywild, as nothing he was aware of could cause this much internal decimation. At once Iliac attempted to heal those he could, and tend to them while he waited for the one outsider he could place his trust within. He waited for the return of the tiefling Xemnas. Upon returning, Xemnas managed to go unnoticed by the mage who had been lost in the results of his diabolical plan. He entered the portal to stand there horrified by what had happened, frozen in shock, attempting to digest what had unfolded in their absence. Iliac summoned Xemnas through telepathy, and in a flash of knowledge informed them everything they knew, including that the mage was actually a warlock pacted with a demon. Iliac had had enough, and decided it was time to close the portal for good, to prevent any more harm to what had once been this peaceful and tranquil place. It was the only way he foresaw peace coming to both sides, and for this he would need the help of Xemnas on the other end. Xemnas offered to become a warlock, themselves in pact with Iliac. He wanted just as much as him to combat the evil warlock and heal the damage bestowed. He would become an agent for Iliac in the human plane, their hand and eyes to act in their place. Iliac saw the passion in Xemnas' heart, not only now but over the years, the passion for the Fey folk, as well as the attachment that shyly grew between them. By agreeing to this, it would mean the portal would be permanently shut. The place that became more so their home than their actual one would never be seen by Xemnas again. A change would be accepted, a direction to his life would be given, one he had secretly been longing for. No longer would Xemnas feel powerless and just getting by in this dark and hostile world. He would gain the power to befriend and aid the Fae, defend those dear, protect those powerless like all the captured pixies, his father and sister. Xemnas could hear at the back of his head something aching, a need to experience, travel, get a sense of wonder, and retell all his new tales to Iliac through a newfound bond. He wouldn't be alone through it. He would be guided. The reassuring joy, which so much resembled that of his father, would encompass his being till death do part. He spent a few moments waiting, eyes locked with the Archfey, before nodding in agreement with a fiery heart of righteous duty. Iliac proceeded to bow down, taking Xemnas' head into his arms and meeting his lips to his forehead. He could feel power, knowledge, timeless wisdom surging into him, almost as if Iliac's presence was becoming part of him. It was dizzying, a kiss feeling as if that of an immortal father, an eternal lover, and all the care in the realm. Upon regaining their senses, Xemnas could note a glow that connected them with a green tint, brighter than that of an evergreen tree, which seemed to take on the form of a barely visible thread connected to their chests. Iliac waved his hand under the thread, allowing a drop of radiance which took crystal form into his hand, resembling an unblinking eye. He draped the amulet around Xemnas' neck. It was a memoir of their newly formed bond, which would remind him of their connection, which will only grow stronger throughout the years. Xemnas could hear a laugh coming from Iliac. A pride shone in his eye. The little tiefling boy who had once wandered into the forest, telling him stories of farming and sheep, had now become as a son to the stag. As he held onto the amulet tightly, Iliac guided him to the portal. Taking one last look at the Feywild he cherished so tightly, he felt reassured of his memories and the power of the gift he had received, and stepping throughout the gate for the last time. With amazement, Xemnas could tell the frightful desires and power of their patron rushing through his body when tricking and luring the evil warlock to passing through the gate once again. On the other end, Iliac had assembled a number of warriors, Dares among them, to decimate the warlock. While that battle was raging on, Xemnas had a hard while ahead of him, attempting to recover and heal the Fae which were injured in the events. The warlock was no match for an archfey and his army, and Xemnas was soon able to send the Fae back to the other side, to become complete once again. Both sides quickly began casting a week-long ritual to seal the portal. The once bright green glow started fading over time, and the once loud crackling turned silent. The two towering trees holding up the portal had quickly withered and dropped all their leaves, dropping with them one side of his life. He spent the next few days in Falkreath, reminiscing the days of his childhood and saying his final goodbyes to the community before heading off to his mother in Winthal. Marloxia had remarried a rock gnome who was a successful merchant and tinkerer. Xemnas was glad to see his mother happy and rebuilding an affectionate household. He stayed with them for a month, yet the city life could never hold him, despite it providing security to his family. The gnome was particularly fond of Xemnas' adventurous spirit, and so gave him a set of tinkering tools as a gift, giving the option for such means of income in life. With his family's blessings, he now headed off north, spending his time failing at tinkering where he could, fishing, hunting, and exploring the wilderness, always in search of those he could help with his herbal healing, both fey and mortal. The days spent roaming the wilderness, traveling further and further north, felt right. Xemnas was at home, living off his survival instincts, and becoming one with nature. That is until, one night a few months later, as he travelled close to the border of Jaskor. Even after the rule of tyranny of Bane had dissipated, tension raged between the countries. Peaceful night's sleep has been interrupted by sudden yelling and Xemnas getting jumped. He was overpowered and swiftly tied up by his attackers, not even being given a chance to see their face due to a swift blindfold, followed by a blow to the back of the head, knocking him unconscious. The next thing he finds himself awoken in a dark shed, tied up. Where, where am I? That is the beginnings of Xemnas Deephollow.
Did he tell that story from atop a mountain?
Yes, well, it quite seems like it, doesn't it?
This is the part of the story where me and Jax appear, right?
I think we may have to leave that story for another time, Mariska.
Oh, come on. The part where me and Jax appear is the best. Though, listening to him talk, he really is the best, isn't he?
My throat is fucked.